question for you guys. Idle thoughts, you know. It's a Zelda question. So the question is first requiring you to believe in the Zelda timeline. If you don't believe in the Zelda timeline, then go ahead and skedaddle. I don't care about your input because you're not going to be helpful. The question is, where or what are the Hebra Mountains or Hebra Mountains? And I was thinking about this because I remember playing Breath of the Wild and running into them. And I remember playing Echoes of Wisdom the other day and running into them. But the location between Echoes of Wisdom and Breath of the Wild is swapped on the map from one's on the right to being on the left. And I'm like, huh? What do you mean? So I was thinking about this. My little, hamster wheel in my brain started turning. So my thought was, okay, what is the earliest part in the timeline that we can identify are the Hebra Mountains? And I was thinking about, okay, so let's go to the first part of the timeline, that'd be Skyward Sword. And Skyward Sword does have, you go to the Eldin province, and there are mountains. It's an active volcano. You're in the northern section of the area. And there's no real dedicated Temple of Time, Master Sword type stuff. So the landmarks that we need to think of would be landmarks like Death Mountain. And if applicable, the Master Sword being inside its pedestal in the Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time. So, and then kind of Lake Hylia, give or take. But Lake Hylia and the river system, I can except that changes. Death Mountain's location changes, we'll get into. So, but if we're talking about just Skyward Sword, we go to Eldin Province. We go into what would be basically Death Mountain. And at this point, the mountain range of Death Mountain, around Death Mountain and stuff, is extremely active. There's a lot of lava on the surface that we can interact with. There's caves, there's a lot of it's just everywhere. By the time we get to Ocarina of Time, it's not nearly as active. So the most games that I've played that I can remember their maps very clearly would be Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Echoes of Wisdom, and then Breath of the Wild. Because, I played Oracles of Ages and Seasons, but I don't remember their map layout. And I don't think I finished either. I think I played a fair bit of Seasons and then less of Ages. And I don't really remember the games too much, so that's on my backlog to play. But anyway, I just don't remember their map layout a whole lot. Oh wait, are you the Gastrodon? Oh no, I didn't save. This might be the Gastrodon. Darn it. So anyway, in my thought process, okay, you look at the Death Mountain, right? Because there's Gorons that live on this mountain range. It is extremely active. There's magma everywhere. And there's various mountains that you can see. So it's basically the Death Mountain in Skyward Sword's era. And then we fast forward, 1,000 years or 2,000 years, whatever time jump they want to do, all the way until Ocarina of Time. So at this point, Ocarina of Time has the Gastrodon, darn it. I should have set up against, hello? Can I not sort? I can't sort from this section. That's weird. So Ocarina of Time, Death Mountain is in the upper right, or the eastern side of the map, the northeastern side of the map. And then Zora's Domain is just south of it, but also on the eastern side of the map. And then the Master Sword is in the Temple of Time in the northern central part of the map. It's not as far north as Death Mountain. That's fine. I don't really care about where Kakariko Village is located because that's going to change anyways. I should heal. That's going to change anyways because Kakariko Village has changed locations throughout the series all the time. So we have mountains around Death Mountain, and then Zora's Domain is basically in the same quadrant in Ocarina of Time. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because Hebra Mountains are snowy. Fudge. Are snowy and cold. So because they're snowy and cold, and Death Mountain at this time, right, assuming it's the Elden province from Skyward Sword, this Death Mountain is not nearly as active as it was. Ouch. Oh my god, I survived. I don't know how I survived. Eos toughed it out, good lord. I don't know if I can survive this Gastrodon. Because that's 2 stacks of defense. So, but we look at it, and I don't know if I can survive this guy. So we look at it, and we can see that this Death Mountain is not very active. It's inactive enough that, like, it's not actively erupting. Any eruption that is caused in the adult timeline is from chaos that Ganon has done, basically. And so we look at Zora's Domain, which is just southeast of Death Mountain in Ocarina of Time. And yes, it's water, but it also has ice sections. And we can see that as we get to the adult section of the time, Zora's Domain becomes frozen over. Now, it likely becomes frozen over due to Ganon's shenanigans, right? Or Ganondorf's shenanigans. That's totally fine. That's just gonna kill me no matter what I do. Due to Ganondorf's shenanigans. However, when we're a child, we can see that that place is frozen to a degree because you go up behind Lord Jabba Jabu, and you can see that there's a mountain range in the back area. That's the back section. Oh god. That's the back section of the whole area. And what we end up seeing is that there is ice, because there's the ice cave where you get the iron boots is in the back there. And you can see that, which means that that ice cave probably does exist in the child section, not just in the adult section of the game. In fact, I'm sure if you could like jump out of bounds or something, you could get over there and see that. So, okay, we now have precedent for mountains, active volcanoes, and a snowy region being within each other within Ocarina of Time. Oh, okay, that's irritating. So now we know who has the Gastrodon. Oh, do I have to pass him to get to the town? I think I might. So, but we go from Ocarina of Time to the adult timeline with Wind Waker. And there's not much to look at because Hyrule is covered in an ocean. However, we can see that the mountain range that would be Death Mountain, because there are Gorons in Wind Waker in the Great Sea, is Death Mountain. And there's Rito live on the current active volcano. Now, I don't believe it's called Death Mountain. I believe it's just called the Dragon Roost area. But we can infer that the active volcano is probably Death Mountain. We don't have to be sure of that because it does not seem that Death Mountain is the largest in the mountain range. It's likely that it is. And then once you go a little bit farther south, we get to Fire and Ice Islands. Now, I don't immediately recall the exact locations of Fire and Ice Island. I have a vague memory that Fire Island is farther north and thus closer to Dragon Roost, aka Death Mountain, or the Death Mountain range. And then Ice Island, if I recall, is farther south, which would be akin to where Zora's domain is located. Now, the iffy thing that we have to consider is, has the map been rotated 20 or 15 or whatever degrees counterclockwise? Because the location of the Master Sword seems to still be like the pedestal in the Temple of Time, but now the Hyrule Palace, if I recall correctly, has been built up around it, which is a little bit odd, right? It's a little bit odd to have the palaces now built into the Temple of Time. This is acceptable of an idea, because when you look at the location of the Temple of Time to Ocarina of Time's palace, they are not physically too far apart, right? The moat is still in the way. There's still probably like a mile or two of distance. So like moving the palace to be on top of that is, you know, I can accept that. I can see that, right? I can totally see that. So, but we look at the, that's rude. But so we look at Wind Waker's idea, and it's like, okay, well, we have the active volcano in the north, still on the east side, and then we have the ice section is also on the east side, if I remember this correctly. So like that's not too bad, right? Give or take, right? Is there a Pokemon Center, or do I have to walk all the way back to Pokemon Center? But so we think of that and we're like, okay, I got it. It's totally fine. I need to heal. It's so weird that I couldn't sort during battle. Okay, let me go to a Pokemon Center, because I don't think the cafe heals you. So, but you think about now the child's timeline is, I went the wrong way. The child timeline is Twilight Princess. And so in Twilight Princess, we have Death Mountain is in the northeastern or right side of the map. Ignore the Wii map. We don't care about the Wii map. We care about the GameCube map, because that was the first release of the game. It is the correct version because Link is left-handed. Cough, cough. Yes, I'm biased. Anyway, Death Mountain is in the upper east, northeastern section of the map. That's totally fine. And then Zora's Domain, oddly enough, is just left of it, because now Zora's Domain is the farthest north section. However, they are both within a mountain range. And so within this exact scenario, you get Death Mountain, kind of active, right? It's throwing out big boulders and stuff, and a Goron and things like that, right? It's you know, it's doing stuff. But then you also get access to oh, gross. Sorry. But so then you also get access to the mountain range that you can see for Death Mountain and Zora's Domain. And Zora's Domain, Source of Water of Hyrule, changing locations, I can work with that to a degree. The interesting thing here, though, is Zora's Domain to the western side of it, right, you move left, leads to the frozen tundra that takes you to the snowy mansion that likely was a Hyrule Knight training academy that the Ocarina of Time, Hero of Time, went ahead and did. So, like, we have a bit of context here, right? We can see this. So, but then you have the frozen section in this mountains area that has no real name, that is in the north section of the map, arguably the northwestern section of the map. And then Death Mountain is the active mountain range in the northeastern section of the map. So is the Death Mountain just the title of the active volcano? And then the the Hebra mountain range is the title of the mountain range that happens to include Death Mountain. Because like you have a single mountain that's volcanic and everything around it's not snowy, and then you have the I'm confused. That's rude. And then you have the snowy region. Okay, so this is good because now we go to the quote-unquote end of the timeline with Breath of the Wild. So Breath of the Wild has the Hebra mountain range in the same quadrant as Twilight Princess has the snowy mountains for the mansion. It is in the northern left side of the map is the Hebra mountain range from what I recall. I might be remembering wrong, but that's what I recall. Now, we know from playing multiple games that Hyrule is a sovereign kingdom and that the kingdom's borders shrink and grow depending on how it's needed. So when you look at Hyrule and Ocarina of Time, they do not necessarily have much of any involvement with the Gerudo Desert, and they don't even go very far south. They don't even go very far east or anything, because just past the Lost Woods in other sections of maps would be a great ocean, and we don't have access to seeing any of that. So that's interesting. But then you also look at the south, past Lake Hylia in Ocarina of Time, and that could eventually be an ocean range, and we don't have access to that. And I'm saying ocean ranges and stuff because if you look at Breath of the Wild, you have access to... I'm going to go this way, because that's a bad sailor. You have access to a coastline and an ocean, and that's the same thing you have access to whenever you go to Echoes of Wisdom. You're a little girl. So, okay, Breath of the Wild has the snowy mountainous region in the northwestern quadrant of the map, and then the active volcanoes and Death Mountain are in the northeastern section of the map. Okay, that lines up with what we ran into in Twilight Princess, so this is consistent. And then we get to Breath of the Wild. From Twilight Princess Breath of the Wild, we look at the south section, and Lake Hylia is more or less in the correct location, give or take. However, between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, and then Breath of the Wild, we have a weird inconsistency in terms of the location of the Deku Tree and the in terms of the Deku Tree and the Master Sword. So the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time has been placed into its pedestal in the child timeline. So in Twilight Princess, the palace location has changed. The palace location has moved much farther north. The map arguably has been rotated a little bit. But the Temple of Time, the exact same Temple of Time that is housing the Master Sword from Ocarina of Time to Twilight Princess, the exact same building, is nowhere near the palace. It is now in the very far south, in a region that arguably is not part of Hyrule as a kingdom. It's on the outskirts of it, if anything. So that's a little bit frustrating in terms of like, okay, it is in a forest, so like the Lost Woods grew up around it, but then you get to Breath of the Wild and the Master Sword is not in the Temple of Time, is not near the palace, and it's in a forest, but it's directly in front of the Great Deku Tree in a completely different area. So like it, I don't know. I will say that I do wonder if perhaps the sword did not start there. So I don't super believe that the Hyrule Warriors games are canon. However, I will say that in Breath of the Wild, in the flashbacks, Link already has the Master Sword, and we don't see where he gets it. He just has it by the time that he is in service to Zelda. So we can kind of assume that the Master Sword might, in Breath of the Wild's timeline, did not originate in being located at the pedestal in front of the Great Deku Tree, and that sword was returned to that location when Calamity Ganon struck and Link almost died at the precursor events to Breath of the Wild. So I'm personally not gonna be super hung up on the location of the Master Sword in this specific instance. That's not super important to me. However, back to the question of what is the Hebra mountain range, or where did it come from? It does seem to be like it's the northern border. So we get to my problem in this question. We've been consistent in our locations until we get to Echoes of Wisdom. My impression of Echoes of Wisdom, based on the appearance of the Great Fairies and the Fairies, and based on the appearance of, I did not mean to use thunder on a fish, based on the appearance of Ganon, not Ganondorf, but Ganon, the pig version of Ganon with a magic staff, and the costuming of Zelda, and then the costuming of Link with his hat, is I'm assuming that Echoes of Wisdom is within the Downfall timeline. So we've entered the third timeline. We have River Zora, we have Ocean Zora, so that's also a difference that does not exist in the child and adult timelines, that River Zora and Ocean Zora distinctly only exist within the Downfall timeline. One usually is evil. So there's that's another credence. This is the Downfall timeline. So we look at the map of Echoes of Wisdom in comparison to all the other maps of Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker to a degree, and then looking at the Breath of the Wild map. Okay, in the northern section of the map, we have a mountain range in the entire northern section. Okay, fine. I accept this. The active volcano with magma is very, very active because there's magma everywhere. And it's on the west side. It's on the left side of the map suddenly. And then the Hebra mountain range, the snowy mountains, are on the right side of the map. They have switched locations. Why? So I can get behind Lake Hylia switching locations because rivers change their pathing throughout thousands of years. Like, let's assume that there's been 10,000 years from Skyward Sword to now. Let's just assume, right? So I can assume that perhaps Lake Hylia is not the source of all water, it is just the largest lake, or it's the main lake that feeds the people for water, for farming or whatever, right? So I can accept that Lake Hylia and the rivers leading to it changed location. I cannot accept that the quote-unquote source of all the water, Zora's Domain, changes location. That's a little bit weirder, but assuming that, like, not everything is to equal scale, or the map gets rotated here and there to a degree, okay, that's fine. I can kind of accept that. But now we have a very interesting instance where Death Mountain is no longer on the eastern side of the map. It is now on the far western side of the map. And again, like, I can accept the palace changing locations and things like that. But now, between Breath of the Wild and Echoes of Wisdom, in the northern section, north, not northwest or northeast, but in the northern section, there is a mysterious forest that you can get lost in. And in Breath of the Wild, that leads to the Deku Tree that has the Master Sword inside of it. I haven't gotten to that section story-wise in Echoes of Wisdom just yet, but I'm assuming that it's going to be the exact same thing as it is in Breath of the Wild. It's going to be the Deku Tree, Lost Woods forest, and it's going to have something equivalent to the Master Sword inside of it for Zelda to use. That's not a big thing. I don't really care. My biggest question is that, like, what is going on with these mountains? Is Death Mountain just the title of the current active volcano? And the Gorons don't like snow, right? So they're going, well, No, they don't really like snow. So the Gorons are going to move their Goron city very easily, right? Because they eat rock, right? They're going to move their Goron city to wherever the active volcano is. So is the active volcano, is the entire mountain range volcanic? And whatever is the section that is active is just the section that's under like a current hotspot, like Hawaii? Is that what we're looking at? Or are we looking at a mountain range that's, I don't know, kind of like the Cascade or the Rocky Mountain range, where Rainier is a volcanic, but it's not active, right? Baker, Adams, those mountains are volcanic, but they are not active volcanoes. They have snow actively on them because of their altitude. But then you get St. Helens, and that volcano is active in the sense that it is growing. It's not active in the sense of like Hawaii's volcano, where it is constantly spewing out lava and magma and stuff like that, right? So I don't know. I'm wondering if Death Mountain is not the name of the mountain range, but it's the name of the only active volcano. Because, like, when we're looking at it in Skyward Sword, I don't believe that mountain is called Death Mountain. I don't think it's called, like, Elden. I think it's just part of, like, the Elden province in general. So that's just... that is my confusion. And then again, you have the Hebra mountain range. So like, I think my biggest question then is like, I would need to see more maps from the Downfall timeline that take place in Hyrule, right? So like not Link's Awakening, which takes place in a dream. I would need to see actual maps of Hyrule, because like, I want answers. I want answers to this question. It feels like the Hebra mountain range is a newly conquered section of Hyrule, and so they have named it Hebra. But it feels also like it is the mountain range that houses the Death Mountain, and Death Mountain is just the title of the active volcano, not the mountain itself. So like, Mount Rainier is always going to be Mount Rainier. Mount St. Helens is always going to be Mount St. Helens. We are not going to switch their names. We're not going to call Rainier St. Helens because it suddenly becomes active, right? Like it's just not going to happen. So yeah, why? I think my biggest question is going from Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild, where Death Mountain is always on the eastern side, and Hebra, or the icy region, is on the western side. The only evidence that we seem to have for a snowy region being potentially on the right is with Zora's Domain in Twilight Princess and within Ocarina of Time, with the icy regions next to Zora's Domain, right? So that does make sense. But then we get to Echoes of Wisdom, and they turn us on our heads and are like, no, here's the active volcano of Death Mountain is now going to be the farthest left west thing on the map. I thought about this the other day, and talking about it aloud, I think I've come to basically the same conclusion, is that the entire northern mountain range is just called Hebra Mountains. And that the Hebra Mountains happen to include Death Mountain. Oh, I wanted to do a setup, darn it. So that's just my assumption. I'm curious what your thoughts are